I will tell you a little bit about Louis' story in Toastmasters and outside Toastmasters. Let me tell you that he is a good friend of us, of all here in the club. He's a great leader. Recently, he was elected as new president. Luis complete his PhD in arts and technology here at UTD a few years ago. He has been a Toastmaster for over 20 years, serving in 18 officer positions at the club and district level, and completed 35 Toastmaster educational achievements, which is great. And well, in Toastmasters, we have a system of education, and something comparable to the PhD is the Distinguished Toastmaster, so which is the maximum award Toastmaster gives to somebody, and Luis have it. He is in addition to give this speech as an educational project, he is fulfilling a project of Toastmaster, which is this speech. Louis Burns with the topic, crafting a speech for impact. Crafting a speech for impact, Louis Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and Speechcraft participants. Recently, a member asked why I thought public speaking was so important. And without even really thinking about it, I just said that public speaking is the skill that unlocks everything else. For this speech, I'm going to compare it to cooking. And not just because some of you are big fans of it, I actually thought about it ahead of time. I'll organize it into some beginner skills, some intermediate skills, and some advanced skills. So starting off with the beginner skills, when you first learn to cook, you have to do things like learn how to break an egg, follow a recipe, keep it simple. Your goal is to make it edible. So I started off in my undergraduate. One summer, I was a cook in a restaurant. It was more of a diner, really. I wouldn't call it fancy by any stretch. We just took the raw ingredients and put them on the skillet and put them on the plate, and it went off. There was no creativity, no thought really involved. Just keep your area clean and use the measured amounts to get the plates that people had ordered. So I've done that. I've done the cooking one, I've done the speaking one. I actually had my first club, one of the older members came to me my second or third year and said, when you first came, it was really painful to listen to you speak. So while I was glad that he felt comfortable enough to just tell me how he really felt, it was hard to hear. I understood that it was true. And so we all have to start somewhere. If it's learning how to break an egg or learning how to give a presentation, we start from somewhere. So these beginner things are things that you can possibly use to start your speech for the next week, or maybe you're already past that. We'll see. So as a beginner, one of the first questions you might have is, what do I talk about? So coming to Toastmasters, a lot of the projects might have a purpose that kind of gives you some idea, or might tell you something to work on that might give you an idea. Otherwise, I would encourage you to just make a list of 10 things that you're interested in or that seem interesting to you that you'd want to do some research on. Narrow that down to your favorite thing. Pick something from that list. That's much easier than starting with a blank page. So pick one thing out of 10, pick the thing you're most excited about, because your excitement and your enthusiasm will carry over into your speech. The next thing is to think of some stories that'll go along with that topic. I like to think of the stories first because they're more important than some of the other details that you might think to include later. Next thing you need to do is organize it. I like to use mind maps. Probably most of you are familiar with mind maps. You just write the idea in the middle and branch it off and keep writing it out until you either have too much material or you can start crossing things off. So most of your speeches, you'll want to come up with 3 points and just narrow it down from there. A lot of people want to write it out word for word, And I would encourage you not to do that, because then what you might end up doing is you'll either be reading your speech or you'll memorize it and then read it out of your head. And it's hard to do vocal variety. It's hard to engage with your audience when you're reading to them. So unless you're doing some kind of dramatic poetry reading or a political speech or reading your vows or something else where the word cannot be wrong, then I would encourage you just to make an outline. Keep the outline nearby. If you need to make a hard copy for your speech, feel free to do that. You may want to write out your actual introduction and conclusion, because those things, especially when you're kind of establishing yourself, getting your feet wet in your speech, until you get your rhythm, it's easier to just rely on something that you prepared, that you think that's the statement that's going to open it and create the impact, or that's the final takeaway I want to make sure that I don't forget to say. Because I've certainly had the experience of finishing a speech and realizing I'd forgotten the most important point. So make sure that you keep all those things in mind as you're organizing your speech. The next thing you do is prepare it, rehearse. And I encourage you to rehearse multiple times. Now, we all are not professional speakers. We don't just prepare and deliver speeches for a living. So within the time that you have, rehearse where you can. So if you have time to rehearse more than one time, then I would encourage you to layer it. So maybe the first time you rehearse, you just check your time. Does the story, does the material you have, does it fit into the time parameters you have? Maybe the next time, check how you're saying different things. If you have a story, are you getting to the point? Or are you rambling a little bit? If you have any jokes, are you able to deliver the punchline the way you want it? Do you find that you're able to pause? Are your opening and closing sounding the way you want? So start to listen to yourself that way. You can record it. You can practice in front of someone else. All those things are great to do. It's just how much time do you have? Practicing a skill like this when you're doing practice that you know ahead of time is going to help you. There's really no bad amount of time. It's just whatever you have to invest in it. Now, we mentioned being nervous a few times. So a couple of things that you can do. One thing, everybody is nervous, without exception. An interesting thing, if you're not familiar, our physiology, the way our body responds, it doesn't know the difference between being excited and being afraid. All your body knows is something's about to happen and it needs to get ready. So I encourage you to channel all that, channel that energy into enthusiasm that you can use in your speech. One thing that when our bodies are under stress, a lot of people hope that they'll rise to the occasion, but we don't. We fall back on our training, on our practice. So whatever the best you've done in practice, you can expect that'll probably be what you'll be able to do in a speech. And as you do more, your average will go up and you'll see better results. So one thing you can do is, a lot of people, when they get afraid, it's because they're thinking about themselves and how they look. Instead, think about your audience. You're there to, what was your goal? To inform them, to entertain them, to give them something of value, to share your story. Think about how the audience is hearing it, because in this online format, it's harder because we don't have direct eye contact with each other. But when you can see your audience, start to get a sense of how they're doing, how you're making an impact to them. They say in Toastmasters that you can't stop the butterflies in your stomach, but you can make them in formation. Now, when you've been giving a few more speeches, you start to become an intermediate. Instead of just a plain old cook, you start to become a chef. A chef understands the principles. Recently, I was trying to learn to cook a brisket, which is a huge piece of meat, 10 to 12 pounds, or 5 to 7 kilos, something like that. And I followed a recipe because it was my first time. I didn't know. And it's a little scarier than normal because it's such a big piece of meat, you can only really, there's no test, right? You just have to cook it and see how it turns out. If it turns out bad, there went a big piece of meat. And apologies to any vegans out there. I remembered after I followed that first recipe, it didn't really turn out the way that I'd hoped. It was not restaurant quality. Nobody complained, but only one person said, thank you for bringing that. So I thought, I've got to fix this. I can't have another mess up. I don't understand what went wrong. I followed the recipe. I wasn't sure, do I put it in the water? Do I keep it out of the water? Do I wrap it up? Do I leave it open? I didn't know what I was doing. So I remembered we had a copy of a book called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. And it's basically the underlying principles of cooking and what you're doing with each of those elements. So I went and read the section on heating large chunks of meat. And I understood what I'd done wrong. I was trying to mix braising with grilling, and you just can't do that. You got to pick one. So I made a new plan. I figured out which recipes I should be paying attention to, and it came out so much better. I was so happy the next time around. So I've started making a journal to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And you can do those things for your speaking too. So your goal, now that you're becoming a chef, is not just to be edible. Now it's to make an impact. It's to sort out and figure out conflicting advice and starting to express your own voice. Some of the skills that you'll develop as an intermediate speaker are breathing, vocal variety, storytelling, and state management, which is just understanding how you're feeling. So the breathing, like Alan was mentioning, we encourage you to learn to breathe diaphragmatically. So you may not see that in the Toastmasters materials, but basically that means that you breathe all the way from your belly. A couple ways you can practice that. One, if you lay down, put your hand on your chest and on your stomach. When you breathe, not only should your chest go up, but your stomach should go up too. That's how you know you're taking a deep breath. Another way you could do it is practice singing. So karaoke, shower, radio, whatever suits you, go practice breathing and practice singing and see how your body feels. So once you've kind of doing that, you can either start to speak even when you're sitting down. Because a lot of times when people are sitting down, they just talk from here and it sounds really muted, like they're not even breathing below their head. So you can talk from your head, you can talk from your neck, you can talk from your chest. If you want to practice all those things, you're welcome to. They can definitely add some vocal variety to your speech. But I encourage you to make your base be the diaphragmatic breathing. And as you do that, you'll find out that your voice is really a musical instrument, and you can start to use it that way. Now, speaking of vocal variety, some of the elements of it are the rate, so how fast you're speaking, some of you mentioned, the pitch, whether you're speaking low or you're speaking high, the volume that you use, if you're using pauses, or the overall tone maybe that you're going for, if you're trying to be serious or entertaining or humorous. All those things can play into how you modulate your voice and the effect you have on your audience. And then finally, state management, knowing how you feel. You're going to feel the nervousness, and that's fine, embrace it. The founder of Toastmasters, Ralph Smedley, said, we learn best in moments of enjoyment. So as you're practicing and growing, think about how much you're enjoying it. So if you're not enjoying it, you might want to change something, because that could be a signal to you that maybe something's not right. If you come and you white knuckle it and you treat it like it's a roller coaster, then it might be hard for you, and it might be hard for your audience. Hopefully no one will ever tell you that it's painful to listen to you speak. So those are all the intermediate skills. When you become an advanced speaker, a chef, you really become more of a holistic chef. Now you're not just mixing things and getting a good result, but you understand the social implications. You start to be able to do it intuitively, and you understand different contexts. You're the one that gets to write the recipes. You've passed being edible, you've passed making an impact, and now you're making a lasting transformation for people. As an advanced speaker, you're going to speak to both minds and to hearts. So let me break those two things down. In speaking to a mind, I'm going to, maybe this is the first time you're hearing this term, but personal knowledge management. What I'm going to encourage you to do, especially those that are working on PhDs or having to write papers, is reuse your work. Document it so that you have it for later. I've written too many articles and blog posts and speeches that all I have is a few notes and they're in a pile now. They have an app where you can make your notes, link them together, and you can end up with something that is something like a Wikipedia page of your own personal knowledge. Because that'll save you from, you read a book and then 2 years later, you completely forgot that you even read it. Because that knowledge is now gone to you effectively. So if you can integrate it, and actually I will post in the chat, there's an app that's really great for this called Obsidian. It is a free open source app that is made specifically for this purpose, for integrating your knowledge. And even this speech, I made it from 8 different notes that I integrated into one product. So when you can organize your thoughts like that, you'll be able to communicate your thoughts better. And doing that will help you to speak to people's minds better. So in any class you have, any project you work on, any job you have, think about dual uses. Think about how would I use this again in the future? Those are the things that you need to make a part of your long-term personal knowledge management. Now, speaking to the heart, I'm going to phrase it this way. There's a good book on, you've probably heard left brain, right brain sort of thing. They call those hemispheric differences for the different hemispheres. There was a good book on it that is massive, and I've only started reading, called The Master and His Emissary. It's based on the metaphor of back in the day when wealthy people had lots of people working for them or other arrangements. And maybe the wealthy person had someone who was specifically responsible for handling their business affairs. So they would send them out to make deals, to get food, to all sorts of things, do their accounting. And the metaphor is that over time, that allows the master to focus on the more valuable things like seeing the big picture, making alliances, setting up new deals, kind of the big picture thing. But the emissary, because they're doing all the actual work, they start to think, I'm doing all the work. I should start getting some of the credit. I should be the wealthy person. I'll just do everything. And so in the same way, you've probably heard, and obviously this is a gross oversimplification, but left brain would be the logical, rational, analytical mind, and the right brain is going to be the emotional, creative type of brain. So that's the master, that's the big picture side. But we often let our left brain take over everything. That's the emissary. And so much of what we do, so much of even our society is based on this left brain way of thinking, of being analytical, of getting the bottom line. And so if you want to speak to people's hearts, you have to speak from the right brain. So that's the heart. So speaking from the mind and the heart is actually speaking from your whole brain, your whole person. So when you can connect with that part of yourself better, you can connect with that part of your audience better. And in some way, it can be through the stories and the metaphors. Finally, the best way I think getting into that is to start practicing mindfulness. You always hear that as a tip, but that's another thing that's a real benefit that I think is underappreciated, is mindfulness is paying attention to your body, to your environment, just kind of letting go of the past and the future worries and regrets for just a little bit and just thinking about where you are in the moment. So mindfulness will help open up your right brain just a little bit more. If sitting still is an issue for you, there's definitely walking or light exercise like Pilates or yoga. Any of those things are great. Or some people just getting out in nature is good. So those are your beginning, middle, and end, your beginner, your intermediate, and your mastery advanced tips that I can give for you today. Everyone, we always start as a basic cook, cracking an egg. As you improve and become a chef, your average performance is going to improve. Your worst day as a chef will be better than your best day as a cook. You'll be able to meet every challenge, figure out and diagnose problems, and approach opportunities with full confidence. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." Speaking is your lever. Practicing makes it stronger and longer so that you can move more of the world wherever you decide to put it. It's the skill that unlocks everything else. Mr. Toastmaster.